Denim Couch Podcast. Ooh, whoa, ooh, whoa.
The 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s with Steph with an F.
Hi guys, welcome to the Denim Couch Podcast, where we chill on this denim couch and talk about the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm Stephanie Tanner. Welcome. Hey guys, it's Stephanie Tanner with the Denim Couch Podcast. And this week's episode is with Janis and Jorge Ribeiro. And I am really excited for this interview. This couple I have known for a little while now. And I just wanted to start off by saying that these two, whenever I saw them and whenever I was at their house or saw them at the grocery store or just passed by, they were always so kind. They are just such kind people. And the general vibe that I get from them is that they are just the most loving. They are so welcoming to everyone. And so I asked them to do this interview and they kindly said yes. And I really enjoyed chatting with them. We had a great conversation. They are just so fun to chat with. And I have always looked up to them because of how welcoming they have always been to me. And I think you guys will really enjoy the stories they have to share from, once again, a different perspective. It's Mother's Day, and we are on the last episode of the 70s. So Mother's Day, I think this is a wonderful day. I personally love being a mother, and I was thinking this week about why I like being a mother, because it's not always easy, and I have a perfect quote that talks about it. I just enjoy watching my kid and other kids grow and learn. I think that's why I enjoy it. I just like watching my kid and seeing what they do and where they're going and spending time with them. And that's really the benefit of it, in my opinion, is experiencing joy through someone else. A lady posted this beautiful article that says, "Motherhood is not for wimps. When you're pregnant, your body turns into a science fair project when you're not in charge of the hypothesis, experiment, or outcome. After the baby gets here, you're sucked on, pooped on, spit on, chewed on, and wet on. Then later you get kicked, punched, screamed at, disobeyed, and run away from. You eat cold meals, wear stained clothes, and never get enough sleep. When your children are finally old enough to help, they won't. When your children are teenagers and their friends come over, they ask you to hide in their bedroom and not come out until their friends leave. When they move away from home for college, they only call home when they want something. So why in the world do we do it?" It talks about how children go off to do amazing things and become amazing people and change the world, essentially. And it says, and we do it because we have chosen not to put ourselves first. We have chosen to be the stewards of a new generation. But my favorite part of this is that it also says, motherhood frees us to love someone more than ourselves and gives a dimension of sacredness to everything we do. Motherhood liberates us from selfishness and creates a gentler world where someone is always looking out for others. Motherhood releases us from a life of get and introduces us to a life of give. All those mothers out there, have a wonderful Mother's Day. I hope those who have not had the chance to be a mother, or those who have lost children, lost mothers, have strained relationship with mothers, those yearning to be mothers, thinking of you as well. And the most important thing is that we're all able to be mothers to many people in our lives by giving instead of getting. And with that, let's dive in. And my first question for you is, can you tell me a little bit more about your name?
Oh, geez. My name, I knew one other person in all of my school years that had my name. And, of course, it was not spelled like mine. It was spelled Janis, I-C-E. That's the most famous person around that time was Janis Joplin. When I tell people about my name, I say Janis, like Joplin.
Yeah, the only thing interesting about my name was the fact that I spelled it differently than everybody else. So I've had to tell that all my life because being, half Portuguese, half Italian, that's the Portuguese spelling of George.
What was life like back in the 70s?
turbulent the times were. In one sense, they were it was a very simple era when you compare it to today's complex, technological times. I mean, we only had one TV set in the house. It only received 4 channels: ABC, CBS, NBC, and PBS, over an antenna on your roof. You only had one telephone in the house, no cell phones, no computers. So that made it really tough. And as I said earlier, I was, just turning 16 years old at the beginning of 17 years old at the beginning of 1970. And I was in my junior year of high school. And to understand where I was in the 70s, you have to go back a few years before that.
Mm-hmm.
68, 69 was a very turbulent and violent time in our country. We had race riots going on across the country. We had riots at the Democratic Convention in 1968. Martin Luther King was assassinated early in 1968, and then Bobby Kennedy in 1968 summer was also assassinated when he was running for president of the United States. And so that, I was 15 then, and that formed a lot of what happened to me in the 70s, because, all of this violence, all of this turmoil in our country really shaped and formed me. And then my father also went to Vietnam, and he was 38 years old, and he was in the Air Force. He was in Da Nang during the Tet Offensive, which was some of the bloodiest fighting during the Vietnam War. I was formed by that, and I had very strong anti-war sentiments. And as Janis said earlier, I marched in numerous anti-war demonstrations in the late 69 and early 70s. Those are the kinds of things that I was dealing with when I was in high school. And the most scariest time happened this week, 50 years ago, was when the 5 students were killed at Kent State University for demonstrating against the war. Being a teenager then, you were facing that. Most likely, me as a male, I was going to be ending up in Vietnam, and I was strongly against that, even though my father was in the service. And I was very active in the anti-war movement. And the draft and the war was so unpopular that they finally, in 1969, had to start a lottery, a draft lottery, because they were trying to find a way to make it more equitable. Because up to that point, basically the poor and minorities who were being drafted, because if your parents were well off enough, or you could scrounge together enough money, you could go to college, you could get college deferment. So basically, wealthy people and white individual males found ways not to Vietnam. And so by 69, because of the unpopularity of the war, they came up with this lottery, which basically, first they would draw a month, and then they would draw a day. They did that for all 366 days of the year. And so that's how they thought they made it equitable. And actually, I was in that lottery in 1972. That was the last of the lotteries. And fortunately, my number was 271. That's a number I'll never forget. When it happened, I knew that I was pretty safe from having to go to Vietnam. But also, it turned out that they actually never drafted anybody from my group. The first 100 people did have to go submit themselves for a physical in preparation to be drafted. But fortunately, the war was winding down. Nixon was, after his reelection in 72, succumbed to the pressures and the unrest that was going on in the country. Then I found myself, campaigning for Senator McGovern for president. And I thought since 1971, the 26th Amendment had been passed so that 18-year-olds could now vote. I had supreme confidence that us young voters were going to turn the tide, and overthrow President Nixon and get him in there and get McGovern, who basically was 100% against the war and wanted to get us out of there quickly. So I was a strong supporter of his. Well, I quickly learned the reality of our country, because in a landslide, Nixon was reelected. McGovern only won one state, and the District of Columbia. And until 1984, when Ronald Reagan, when he was reelected, that was the worst defeat the Democrats had ever received. It wasn't going to be as easy to change the world as I thought it was going to be, because we'd had some successes, changing the voting age. We were moving towards getting out of Vietnam. We were becoming more socially conscious. The ERA had passed the House in 1971, and then the Senate passed it in 1972, and it went out to the states for ratification, and almost immediately 35 states ratified it, but they couldn't get those last 3 states to ratify it, and eventually by the mid-70s it became dead, and then by the end of the 70s the ratification period ended and stuff. So, but there was a lot of hope and optimism in my age group at that point because we felt we were making social change. You know, we were very, very strongly activists in, you know, trying to preserve the earth. You know, we felt that fossil fuels were destroying us, and the Environmental Protection Agency became stronger and created a lot of laws that helped us. All of those things took place in the early 70s. You know, the activisms to save the world were a lot of them, and I was knee deep in a lot of that, and it was a very exciting and fun time. The Civil Rights Acts were passed, you know, so there was a lot of activism around the civil rights, about equality of, you know, getting the votes for the people of 18. So because they were asking us to fight the war in Vietnam, but we couldn't even vote. You know, we were old enough to fight and die, but we weren't old enough to vote. That actually was the slogan during that time period.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there was a lot, I'd say from the mid-60s through the mid-70s, that is probably the greatest period of activism.
What did you do for fun in the 70s?
So my years through the 70s was junior high and high school and early college. So junior high, we would skateboard. Obviously, we'd ride our bikes. A big thing was roller skating on Friday nights to good old 60s, 50s music at the roller rinks. I grew up in Southern California where swimming and swim teams were also really active. My family was into sports, so we did have volleyballs and we had a basketball court in the yard, and so those are the kind of things we did. But as a group, skating on Friday night was the highlight. But yeah, we all either rented their skates at the skating rink or you had your own because you did it in your driveway or down your street. Those were the times when there was no helmets and seat belts in our cars, and we were out on the streets with our skates and our skateboards.
I love to go to drive-in movies. You know, those were still available back then. Matter of fact, in Tucson at that time, there were 9 drive-in theaters in the city of Tucson. So you had your choice, and that's where you spent a lot of evenings. Also, out in the front yard of your friends in the neighborhood. The street I lived on, it was a block of about 16 homes, and there was 19 kids between 12 years old and 20 years old. So we all kind of hung out in the summer, you know, playing music, listening to our different bands, and then obviously friends had instruments, and we would just sing out there, and usually a lot of protest songs. And you know, some of the older kids would smoke a little weed, and myself, I never got into drugs when I was young in those age, because I had too many instances in my family where older siblings, not older siblings, but older cousins had done too many recreational drugs, and it had affected them mentally, and so that scared me to death. You know, I know that's one of your questions later, but that prevented me from experimenting early in my life with drugs.
What were some popular activities?
Well, just like with George, we did go to drive-in movies, and they were big back in, even through my high school years. My family, myself, had a group of family friends that we'd go to lakes and water skiing camp, probably about 10 families together. And as a part of that, my dad was in a little singing group that played at our local amphitheater in our little park, and they'd go up there and sing on stage every Friday night when we were home, and or Saturday night, and we would watch the old folks sing old folk songs. And it was kind of a fun thing because the kids could run around and buy ice cream, and it was a small town life. I grew up in a town of about 10,000 people, as opposed to, you know, George in a bigger city. High school age was more football games, dances, school events, and again, every chance we could, we'd go to the lake and camp and water ski.
Do you have any favorite memories from the 70s?
In the 70s, obviously, I spoke extensively on my activism, and not only against the war in Vietnam, I was a supporter of the United Farm Workers, and I picketed Safeways in Tucson, to support them getting Union lettuce and Union grapes, and that was a lot of fun. As I said, I campaigned for McGovern. Favorite memories was graduating high school in 1971, where I made $100. Someone dared me to do something when I received my diploma, and it was nothing obscene or terrible. I was known for doing a shout out at basketball games. Dared me for $100, and $100 in 1971. You can go Google that and find out what that's worth today. But if I'm not mistaken, that's probably close to $400 to $500 today in today's money. But he dared me to, when I got my diploma, to turn around and lead my cheer off the stage, and that was a great memory of mine, because I was ready to run off the stage if it wasn't met with the positive reception, but it was, so I went through the whole cheer. And then, of course, my college graduation, getting married to Janis in 1979 at the end of the decade. And then probably the next biggest thing was in 1976, to celebrate our country's bicentennial, Greyhound was offering a bus pass for $200. You could travel anywhere Greyhound or Trailways went in the United States for 2 months. And so I traveled all over the West, celebrating our bicentennial, and went to Mount Rushmore, went to the Tetons, Yellowstone. I hit a lot of national parks and national monuments. And a friend of mine was in Columbus, Ohio, going to Ohio State. I visited him, and then I spent a few weeks with my family in Bedford, Massachusetts, where I'm from. And then I rushed home to rush off to college. But that was some exciting times.
I agree with George. The bicentennial in 1976 was huge. I actually graduated from high school in 76. And it was a real celebration in our country, not like a normal 4th of July. It was something that it was like an accomplishment for our country to be that old or go through that era. I do have memories similar to George of camping in Yellowstone with my family. We took cross-country trips, pulling trailers, and there was 5 of us children, and so it was sometimes very hectic, very crowded, but, a lot of good memories camping out and thinking about bears through the night and wondering, how low the temperature was going to get out there. Early 70s, I was young, going through junior high, and all those trials and tribulations of, we were the first era of junior high kids that were allowed to wear jeans to school. Levi 501 straight leg jeans. And that was a big deal, because, before then, girls mainly wore dresses and little shoes and bobby socks. But also, going into high school, we wore the hot pants and miniskirt era. So every time my daughters went through that fingertip on your dress and shorts era when they were in school, it made me laugh, because we literally wore miniskirts to school in high school. We weren't wearing tie-dye like the boys were, or fringe leather jackets. We just had a good time, itsy-bitsy bikinis. So when we were out at the swim pool, and it was a good time. It was fun. So as of big memories, I probably saw my first concert, which is the Beach Boys, then going off to college in the mid-70s and leaving California to go to Arizona, which is where I met George.
What was the style like back in the 70s?
Oh, it was so much fun. I mean, it really, for girls at least, we had the big bell-bottom Levi's, kind of come back and forth over the years. Capri pants, which I never thought would come back after they left in the late 70s. Maxi dresses, of course, wearing Levi's, which are jeans, we would say, because they were actually Levi 501 straight leg jeans, and they were kind of a big deal back in the day because it wasn't really a thing that girls wore Levi's, like only ranchers and workers really wore them, and they kind of came into style for everybody after that. But mini skirts, hot pants, itsy bitsy teeny weeny bikinis. If you've ever heard the song, it's true, very true for the 70s, probably also the late 60s, but I was younger, a little bit younger then. Platform shoes. They were amazing when you were younger. I had one pair of Huarache platform shoes that were probably 6 inches in total with the platform, halter tops. It's amazing how we've come to worry about our children's dress in their schools when I look back at my high school and think nobody cares. But we went through tons of phases of from the mini skirts and short shorts to then the gaucho and capri look, and sandals, which weren't really big when I was younger, but the Huarache sandals, and you could wear sandals with almost anything. We went through a huge, in that 10-year period, a huge style change. And of course, as a part of it, there was the disco movement, which I know my husband doesn't love, but it was fun. So we had our clothes specifically for doing the bump and Saturday Night Fever moves and line dancing, which we called the electric slide.
Fashion for me was pretty simple. I wore a lot of cut-off shorts, white T-shirts. Then when tie-dye came in, I made a lot of homemade tie-dye T-shirts that I would wear with either my cut-offs or my Levi. I wore a lot of bell-bottoms. I had my favorite what I called my hippie leather vest with fringes and beads on it, and wore a lot of headbands. And by the time I was going off to college in the mid-70s, I was into wearing train engineer bib overalls. First time Janis found me with my Oshkosh bib overalls, because I was just beginning that trip I told you about, and I had everything I was going to live in for 2 months in a backpack. So you don't bring a lot of clothes, and mainly a lot of underwear, and so mainly T-shirts. And my main article was my train engineer Oshkosh bib overalls, and I used to wear my engineer hat on backwards, and I had my big beard by then, and so fashion for me was very simple.
What made you happy back in the 70s?
Probably the things that always has brought me the greatest satisfaction and happiness is focusing on family, friends, and definitely only focusing on the things that I can control. I try not to worry too much about the things that I can't control, because it just makes you unhappy with what's going on in your life. So I've always lived my life by the old saying of you hope for the best but prepare for the worst. And so if I always focus on the best in people and the best in the world and don't focus on the negative, I find that's the best way to remain happy. I've been very fortunate to have a wonderful life with Janis over the last 40 years, and being involved in Brianna's and Mariah's life has brought me nothing but the greatest joy. So that's a very simple philosophy that I've lived by. Is just focus on what you can control, focus on family, your friends, and try to make a difference in your world. And the way I've always tried to make a difference is not just talk it. It's to, as they say, walk the talk. And so I'm not maybe actively protesting the way I have been. I've always led by example with my kids, as far as recycling and everything like that. I've recycled whenever I can all my life, and I feel if everybody does their little part like that, it just takes a lot of people doing little things to make this world where we'll all be happy in it, and not to try to find things that separate us, but try to find the things that bring us together.
Yeah, just as with George, hanging out with friends, going to football games, sporting events, going to dances, going to the river and, water skiing and camping. As with George, I grew up being outside and going to state parks and national parks quite a bit, and we followed that with our children, that you always leave a place cleaner than you found it, whether it's a campground or just walking a trail. George has always been the first one to pick up somebody's discarded water bottles or Coke cans. So we've kind of passed that on to our children, is the love of the land and the love of the earth, to just take care of it and leave it better than you found it. But as for that era, just doing the really outdoor water skiing, camping, hanging out with friends, music was a big deal in the 70s. We just, similar to George, sit outside or sit around the pool and just, someone had a guitar and we'd sing. And it was kind of a throwback time, I'd say, that you just was simpler. There was not so much else to do. There wasn't, obviously electronics or technologies of today. And it was just simple. You just hang out and, sing and talk and try not to do bad.
Were you ever scared, unhappy, or anxious?
There's never been a time when I personally felt I'm been unhappy in my life, because I've always felt in control of it once I no longer live with my parents, because I've always felt if I make good decisions, I'll always keep myself in a good place. But there were times in the early 70s and the late 60s, during the time I was an activist in the anti-war movement, there was a lot of hatred, kind of like today. There definitely, that time period was a very polarized period, just the way it is today. And, occasionally when we were out doing our protests and we were marching, people who didn't share our views, expressed it in not what I would call a strong, violent way. They would shout obscenities at you and tell you to love it or leave it. I never really became scared until what happened at Kent State. When that happened, that gave me pause 50 years ago, to say, well, what I was doing, is it worth my life? And though I was scared, I continued to do what I did, obviously. I strongly believe what I was doing was right, and I wasn't going to let the violence that was taking place in our country dissuade me from what I felt was right in the country. I've been very fortunate and very privileged in my life, and I'm very grateful for it. And I always try to put myself in someone else's shoes before I make decisions or take actions.
My biggest fear was probably from the race riots in Southern California. I grew up in a town with a very, very diverse population, and there was an Indian reservation 5 miles outside of town. We had a lot of people of color, of all kinds of diverse backgrounds. And when those race riots started in the LA area, the tension and fear of it coming into our high school, of looking at each other differently, was you felt it. There was an underlying current, and it was scary and it was sad, because that wasn't who we were in that small town, but it was a bigger conversation of how people lived and why they were happening. But it came home to us because it was only 80 miles away from us. So that was probably my biggest memory of fear throughout, junior high and high school.
How would you compare your childhood or teenage years to today's kids?
Social media has made teenage life very hard, whether it's from just owning a cell phone and being bullied, or just having looking at comments, looking at constant ads through whatever social media. I think that their time as teenagers is much, much harder, with the fact that they have constant information or constant contact, and it's obviously not all positive.
And how people interacted.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of interacting face to face. In my day, when I was growing up, someone said something behind your back, you went to their face, you don't. Nowadays, someone says something on Facebook and reposts it and reposts it and reposts it. Instead of having to deal with one person, you might be dealing with a dozen or 2 dozen people who are all of a sudden now believe what that person said. In the old days, I hate to say it that way, but in the old days, you just had to deal with the one person who was spreading any gossip or rumors about you and deal with it one-on-one, but nowadays the people can hide behind their devices.
Right. It's easy to be hateful behind a screen.
People have become more hateful.
That's true.
Than it even was back then,
What brings you peace or calmness during hard times?
Well, for me personally, this has been quite, for everybody, living through a pandemic is something we obviously never thought would happen. Being with our family and having our 20 daughters in our 20s home and knowing they're safe at this time is very reassuring and, makes my heart happy that we are together during this, and then our extended family being safe, just leaning on each other and knowing that we have each other's support and best wishes in mind.
I hate to repeat myself, but I focus on the things I know I can control. I work on the things that help keep my family safe, regularly stay in touch with my parents anyways, but now maybe a little bit more. I try to make sure that the people around me are happy, and I don't sweat the small things is what I like. What I like to do is, there's only so much each of us can handle as an individual, and so I try to focus on big things I can handle. There are a million details in our life, and we can run ourselves ragged trying to control everything. But if you break life down into 2 or 3 main things that you can focus on, I find that's how you can maintain happiness in a time like a pandemic that we're going through right now. Is don't try to solve all the problems. Focus on the things that you can solve, and then you try to have as much empathy as possible for the people who have it a whole lot worse than we do.
What a wonderful interview. I just love the energy that they have and the humor, and what wonderful people. I have always admired them for the way they treat people. And so, thank you, Janis and George. And we will look forward to the recap next week of the 70s. See you then. Bye.
Wait. You can't miss the embarrassing story of the week. No. Okay. It's that time. It's Steph with an F's embarrassing story of the week.
I thought a cat was dying today, and I decided to help this cat recover with the help of my neighbor and my cat. This cat is in my garage. Now, mind you, I don't love cats. I love dogs. I'm a dog person, and cats make me have allergies like no other. I could not own a cat even if I wanted to. And so I felt bad for this cat because it just felt like it had no energy, and it looked like it was too skinny and just looked lost. It was also rubbing against me and my son a lot. So we took it to the neighbors to ask what we should do, and I ended up housing the cat and feeding it in my garage. And then the neighbor came over and told me, in fact, this was just a skinny cat. It was not dying. It was totally fine. And here I am, debating whether or not I need to let it out or find its owner. I've been trying to find its owner, but I just want to let it back out because it's not dying. It could probably find its home. So embarrassing for me to think that this cat was dying when in fact it was just a skinny cat. There are skinny cats out there, and they are not dying. Oh boy. So that's my embarrassing story for the week. I hope you all have a good week. Looking forward to next week. Talk to you then. Bye. If you came here for mental health help, please go visit your doctor. If you're looking for some mental health tips, Dr. Daniel Amen is someone I follow. I love what he has to say and offer. I think his website is brainhealthassessment.com, and he just has some awesome checklist items that go over brain health habits that you should be doing to have better brain health. I want to say there's like 5 to 10 items, and if you have those, if you're working on those habits and trying to improve them to improve your brain health, you'll also improve your happiness level, because brain health equals mental health. So keep your brains happy and healthy, and check out Dr. Daniel Amen. This is not sponsored. I just really like what he has to say, and I think it's really beneficial. I think it can help a lot of people. It's actually very matter of fact, kind of obvious, but yeah, we neglect so many of these habits daily, and I do feel like, if you're feeling unhappy, that may be one of the reasons you're unhappy, because you're neglecting your brain health, which is also your mental health, and yeah, trying to improve these habits could really help. So check him out. If you have any stories from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, please get in contact with me. Let's chat. I want nothing more than to chat about the past. I want nothing more than to chat about the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. If you have any specific questions that I'm not asking that you would like to know about these eras while interviewing these people, please let me know. I would love some advice, and I would love your input. So, what would you guys like to know?